Okay, so this video is about global and local variables, and you can see this article linked below. I'm just going to take you through a couple of like this first example here. I'm going to show you how to define a local and a global variable and what the difference is. And then I'm going to show you, also going to show you this one. So this one is going to have a count up, and you'll see how if you define something locally, you're not able to count up with it, whereas if you do it globally, you will. So let's get started. So you should open up a Replit 2 if you're following along. Right, so let's have let's create a global variable. So this is going to be called global counter. We're going to initialize that to 0, and then we're going to have local counter. So where we define a global and local variable makes a difference. If you define it at the top of the class, just after you've opened it, after the opening bracket, then this is global. And if we define it inside of that function, it's local only to that function, unless, like in the video before, where I talked about pass by value, pass by reference, you pass this integer by reference, and then you're able to change it. Right, so then we're going to create a function. This function is going to be called count up. It's not going to take any parameters. The only variable we'll be able to change is this one. We're going to increase it. And I'm going to do a console, right line, and I'm going to print the value of global variable here. And then I'm going to call count up like that. And then if I print it, I print this out again. So I keep doing this, you will see that the variable global counter will increase. However, we couldn't update local counter because if I did that and I try and run that, the error will be that it doesn't know what local counter is, because local counter is defined locally here in this public void main function. Yeah, so that's it. Oh, it's got an error there because I put semicolon, but also it does say that it will say that it won't know what local counter is because we've defined it here. There's a couple of other errors which aren't. Yeah, we've got to make that public static void. I finished that function definition. I need to make that static too because it's in a static class. So we'll get rid of those errors. So I think it's just rerunning it. There we go. The variable local counter is assigned, but its value is never used. And then it says local counter here. Local counter does not exist in this counter context. It doesn't exist here. Why? Because it's defined here. So you might think, right, well, let's just define it here. But if I was going to do this, I wouldn't be able to, like this, if I was going to define it here, locally here, it's going to get reset to 0 every time, which isn't going to be very useful, because if I wanted to print that out here, because I wouldn't be able to print it out up here because the local counter is defined here, I'm just going to get 0 every time. But global counter will increase because it's defined here, and then it's updated here every time we call count up, and it's never reset. It's only initialized to 0 once here. So if I run this now, the program will work, but you'll see that every time I call it, local counter is going to be 0, but global counter is going to go from 0, 1, 2, and 3. So it's really important to understand this concept. Here we go. If you look at the printout there, we've got 0, 1. So it prints out 0, and then it prints out 1, the local one, then it prints out 1 for the global one, sorry, then it prints out 1 for the local one, prints out 1 for the local one, it prints out 2 for the global one, prints out 1 for the local one, and 3 for the global one. So you can see that it's actually able to change the value of it. So what are the positives and negatives of using global variables? Well, as we'll come on to in the next video about classes, we need to have global variables in classes because we need to have variables that can be used throughout in all the different functions. They're the properties of the class, but global variables increase the overhead, the memory usage of a class or a piece of code, whereas local variables only need to exist within that function. So outside of that function, this doesn't exist. Therefore, once this function is finished operating, the computer can clear that out of its memory, and it's a bit more memory efficient. But considering how powerful computers are these days, you would hardly really notice. But there may be a reason to have a local variable. Say, for example, in a for loop or a while loop, you have like local counters in those. They're not something that we need to make global. And if we did make it global, we might introduce errors into it. So if you remember, I did a for loop for int I equals 0, whilst I is less than 10, say, and then I increase that. And if I printed out this loop, if I print out I in the loop, this variable I, which I've defined here in I equals 0, only exists within those brackets. So this I is local to this for loop. And it wouldn't make sense to have a counter up here, to use global counter up here. I suppose you could, but it wouldn't really make any sense unless you have a specific use case. And that is the difference between global and local. It's about where you define it. Globals use more memory, that they need to be kept alive during the entire program run or existence of the class, whereas a local variable like this, they don't use up as much memory because they are only kept alive inside of the functions that need them. So now what you need to do is go and have a look at, in the link below, look at this Medium article, have a look at some of these examples, read through this. So you have to identify which ones are global, which ones are local, why they're local, why they're global. This is the one I've just been through with you, predicting the output. And then in this one, article task 3, you have to modify the code to make X global. So that, and then update the function so you can double the value. And then try have a go at writing this function here, which is basically what we've just done. Write a method named reset counter that sets the global variable counter back to 0. Demonstrate how this method can be used within the main method after calling increment counter a few times. So so in this example here, we've got increment counter. You'd want to add in reset counter, and then how could you use that? What you would need to call that from the main function, and then have a think about the pros and cons of global and local variables. Maybe go and look it up, ChatGPT. And then here's a bonus task, an extra one. Refactor this code so that it uses local variables instead of the global variable result. And that should be enough practice for you to understand it. But really, the understanding of global and local variables comes into play when we do object-oriented coding.